Do you want to start? Or should
I was going to introduce you, but...
Well, whatever, you're in charge. Whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for coming, and Professor Pino for bringing your class. I appreciate it. So today, as you know, we have Professor Lasksin with us, and I want to first congratulate you on your new book on investor relations that was launched at the end of 2017. So I don't know if you got the chance already.
I can show the picture.
Oh, look at that. You can get it on Amazon. So congratulations on the book. And this is a quick excerpt about what the book is about. So it provides an overview of the past, present, and future of investor relations and financial communications as a profession. It addresses key topics of concern to contemporary practitioners, such as social responsible investing, corporate governance, shareholder activism, ethics, and professionalism. So really all timely topics that I believe perhaps you cover in business strategy or in other courses. And let's see, so Professor Laskins earned his PhD from the University of Florida, and he has 2 master's degrees because one wasn't enough. So has 2 master's degrees in international business and in communication, and an undergraduate also in 2 majors in geography and in English. And he has a number of distinctions and has published over 50 publications, including books, book chapters, and journal articles. And one of the many distinctions is being a Fulbright specialist, a Page Legacy Scholar, and a Planck Fellow. So congratulations on all your achievements, and thank you again so much for being with us today. And thank you for doing the drive to come to LaSalle.
Thank you.
And welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come here. It's my second time. The first one was 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think around 20.
And then we tried to do another one, but couldn't find the data for all of us. So I'm going to talk about investor relations. And before, since we have a small intimate class, how about we'll just go around the room. You tell me what do you think investor relations is, and then your name and your major. Start?
Me?
Yeah. What is investor relations? Your name and your major.
Okay, so my name is Pongsakan. I come from Thailand. And for me, investor relation is mean like about money. When you pay money and you want something back, something like that.
All right. Good.
My name is Jutagan. I'm Thai. So for me, investor relationship that is them about the business, about the money, owner, and employee, everything about business.
Okay. And what's your major? What do you study?
Pardon?
What's your major?
My major is a project management.
Okay.
I am Pakapon Thailand. My major is marketing management. And I think investor relation is about the relation of investor who want to invest in the business and have the communication about it.
All right.
Hi, my name is Barbara. I'm getting my master's in management. I'm from Brazil, and for me, investor relations, I feel it's like about maybe private equity, like when you get companies and then you want to invest money on these companies and develop a business.
Okay. Do you want to give
Yeah.
definition? Right?
They all know me. They either have me now or had me before. The one thing you asked is investor relations. In the United States and probably in many of the more free market economies, there has to be a source of funds for companies to grow, to start, there are very few Elon Musk around who can self-fund anything. And so it's critical that the investor class, the source of funds, knows what's going on in the company, and they're now getting more and more impact on what a company does, to try and keep them profitable. Are they going down the right road? Et cetera, et cetera.
Well, some of them, some actually getting less and less. In fact. Some of them do get more and more impact, some get way less and less.
Well, some of them buy the stock, put it
But
away.
we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, my name is Mohanna, I'm from Saudi Arabia. My major is PR. And I think about investor relations should be like as business or between like personality or yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hi, I'm Dina Salvucci, and my major is, I am in the master's program for management with a human resource concentration. My idea of investor relations is a department or within an organization that focuses on developing relationships with other organizations through communication, marketing strategies, and you know, tries to enhance a business's chances of succeeding by kind of incorporating all those aspects and developing strategies to succeed with that.
Okay. Good.
Hi, my name is Yashna and I'm from India. And so I think basically just the relationship for an investor with a company and just the company and investor, like their relationship. I don't know.
Okay.
I have
All right.
I'm Darren, MS Math Management program here. And having been a broker for both UBS and Merrill Lynch, I'd say if you don't have relations with your clients, they're not investing with you, or you need to have a dialogue. You need to have the proper dialogue when they're losing money, especially, or when the market's in a downturn. So that, to me, relations are personal that way, one-on-one with your clients.
So how sell side is doing nowadays?
I went to options trading years ago, so I'm not with firms, I'm just independent.
All right. All right. So thank you guys for sharing your definitions of investor relations. I've been studying investor relations for probably, well, more than 10 years already, close to 15 years. So I've heard thousands of definitions and read probably hundreds of different definitions in different articles and different textbooks, and they all have some similarities. They have some differences between each other. So we're going to talk about a few main ones. One of the common approaches to defining investor relations is trying to recognize what investor relations is part of. And there are some discussion in the industry if investor relations is part of relationship management functions, such as public relations or strategic communications or reputation management, or is investor relations part of the financial function that reports to chief financial officer or treasurer, and so on and so forth. So there is some tension between is it a financial function or is it a relationship management function. But most people recognize that it's a relationship management function. Even if it reports to chief financial officer, they still recognize the need for building and maintaining a relationship. And so people who agree that investor relations is part of the relationship management function, part of the public relations function, strategic communication function, they look at the definition of public relations and strategic communication. So we have one PR major. Do you know what the definition of public relations? Not investor relations, but public relations itself, since it's your major.
Yeah, I mean, actually I'm in marketing communication and PR.
Okay.
I want to take PR classes. I actually took like a lot of them, and in summer I will take more also in fall. Yeah, this is what I can create. I want more experience with PR.
All right, so the largest professional organization of public relations and strategic communication in the world is PRSA, Public Relations Society of America. About 4 years ago, they conducted a huge crowdsourcing event where they asked all public relations and strategic communication and marketing communications and reputation management people to come together and send them how they define their job, what is the definition for what they're doing. And so through that crowdsourcing event, PRSA created a definition of public relations that's essentially done by practitioners, for practitioners. Academics try to influence it as well, but most of it was done by 22,000 members of PRSA. And so this is the official definition, so it was 2012, so 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Public relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. One word in this definition caused a lot of tensions. People were arguing almost to the fist fights about one word they could not agree, if it should be there or if it shouldn't be there. Can you guys guess what word upset everybody? Well, not everybody. Half of the people were really upset and half of the people really wanted the word in there. Can you guys guess what word it is?
For the whole PR picture?
Strategic.
Nope.
What?
Everybody was happy with strategic.
What did you say?
I said strategic, so scratch that.
I would have said mutually beneficial.
No, they were happy with that. Surprisingly, the word that half of the people strongly felt should not be here is communication.
Wow.
So although most public relations programs are in the departments and schools of communications, practitioners were very upset with, well, half of them again. It was like 50-50 split.
So what did they want in its place?
Well, that's what I want to say now. So what they were saying is, you cannot equate public relations with communications. Because public relations is about building and maintaining relationships. So organizations have a lot of different stakeholders. In public relations we call them publics. And you have to maintain good relationships with all of them. So you have employees, you have investors, you have local community, you have suppliers, you have customers, whatever all these different, for university, it's students, parents of the students, faculty, you have to maintain good relationships with all of them. And people were saying you cannot maintain relationships just with communications. Think about your own personal relationships. You have parents, maybe children, maybe friends, boyfriends, girlfriends. You all have relationships with them. Some better, some worse, but you don't maintain that relationship through just communications. You maintain that relationship through your actual actions. Your parents not just gonna tell you, I love you and support you, they're actually gonna love you and support you. It's more than just talking, it's more than just communicating, it's actual actions. If it's a friend, they might, get into a fist fight for you, they might lend you money, they might actually do something. And so people were saying, public relations is not a communication function, public relations is a management function. And so what they were asking is public relations is a strategic management process that builds mutually beneficial relationships. They will say communication is part of it, but it's one of the aspects of building and maintaining a relationship. You need to walk the talk. You cannot just talk. You need to actually do something. And so public relations should be part of the management team. Public relations people conduct research. They learn about their publics. What do employees want? What do customers want? What do investors want? They analyze that research. They come back to the management team and they say, we have a problem. The customers don't like our product, we need to change something. And the management, if it's actually the issue that can be addressed, changes the product. Like Samsung phones were exploding, customers didn't like it, they came back to management and said, well, we need to shut down the phone and then use different supply for the battery so it's not going to explode anymore. It's not just talking, it's actually acting and changing. And so that was a big discussion if it should be communication and management. In the end, they stuck with communication, but many people use the definition that when they replace communication with management, because again, communication is part of building and maintaining a relationship, but not the only thing.
You could delete it altogether, just a strategic process.
But can you communicate through your actions?
Yeah.
Communication isn't just verbal communication.
That's absolutely true.
So, for me, when I look at strategic communication process, to me, it encompasses numerous ways of communicating. And
Yeah, there were
so,
many people who had that argument, and then other
so
people
I
were
guess I know
saying,
what side of that argument.
well, why do you have to say communication? Why can't you sell management or action? Because when your communication is also part of the action. When you act, one of the types of actions, you can be walking, you can be talking. So why do you need to say communication?
So I
Why do you
guess
separate this particular action from other actions, like doing research? But anyway, so
Yeah.
the discussion was very, very active, but finally it was approved and accepted this way. And another important part of this definition is mutually beneficial relationships. So the idea of modern day public relations is that you try to build relationships so that everybody gets something out of it. It doesn't mean that it's 50-50. So company gets equal benefit from the relationship with employees, and employees get the very same amount out of a company. But it's beneficial for both of them. Employee gets something out of working at the company, and company gets something out of it. The same as customers. Apple doesn't try to shove their laptops down people's throats saying, buy my laptop, you have to. They don't put gun to their head. But people line up in mile-long lines to buy the new Apple iPhone because they get something out of it, and Apple gets something out of it as well because they charge crazy amount of money for their iPhone every 2 years. So everybody gets something out of this relationship. So this is what mutually beneficial stands for. Between organization and their publics. In the original version there was slightly longer part. It said between organization and publics on which its success or failure depends. So not all the publics, but only publics on which success or failure of organization depends. And this is a big part of public relations and management as well. It's analyzing your publics, analyzing your stakeholders to understand which public has what kind of power of the organization. Because at different stages of company development, different publics, different stakeholders have different power. If you are a startup, you're trying to get you have to get good employees, you have to get good engineers because you need to develop the product. Then once you develop the product, customers become very important. You need to get the customers, you need to start selling. Then later maybe you are very successful, but you run out of enough parts to build your product. So then suppliers become more important. And so a big part of public relations, which is again speaking to the management concept, and that is analyzing the stakeholders, analyzing the publics, and trying to figure out which one is important, how they can affect the organization, and how you can build and maintain relationship with them so the organization can survive and prosper. And so public relations is a generic term, and public relations builds and maintains relationships with publics, and these publics can be, that generic term publics can be replaced with a particular public. So if we want to do a definition of investor relations, we can simply replace the term publics with the term investors, and that will give us a definition of investor relations. So in this case, investor relations will become, investor relations is a strategic communication process that builds on mutually beneficial relationships between the organization and the investors. If you want to do employee relations, HR, you can say employee relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationship between the organization and their employees. Community relations, same thing, and their community, and so on and so forth. So all these different sub-functions of public relations that are usually defined by the public with which you build and maintain relationship, you can easily apply the same definition to all the different publics. And so this is the definition by PRSA, Public Relations Society of America, the largest professional organization of strategic communicators. Of course, there is a unique professional association dedicated just to investor relations. Obviously, it's significantly smaller. Instead of 22,000, it's about 4,000 members, and it's called NIRI, National Investor Relations Institute. The same way, it's a professional organization, so people who are involved in the profession of investor relations, they're usually members of this organization, and then every June they have a conference and they meet together 1 year in Florida, 1 year in California. All these changes, and they have their own definition of investor relations, which is slightly more complex. Here they use the term management instead of communication. They say investor relations is strategic management responsibility that integrates finance, communication, marketing, and securities law compliance to enable the most effective two-way communication between the company, the financial community, and other constituencies, which ultimately contributes to company securities achieving high valuation. So that's the definition by NIRI, National Investor Relations Institute, from March 2003, and that was a very important update to the definition, because what they changed in 2003 is they changed the engine, achieving fair valuation. Before 2003, the definition said achieving high valuation. So before, the goal of investor relations was to push the stock as high as possible, and there were some events happening at the beginning of the century which caused them to change the definition and focus on the fair value, which means whether it's information that can push the stock up or if information that can push the stock down, you're supposed to make sure to communicate it to all the different publics that are important for investor relations so that the valuation is fair. Not as high as possible, but fair, that actually reflects the value. An interesting, I think a good part about this definition that it talks about all the different aspects that involved in the investor relations job. Investor relations relies a lot on financial knowledge because a very big part of investor relations job is communicating with financial community, with financial analysts, be it sell side or buy side, with the actual investors, and they all want to know your financial position, how you are doing. They have a bunch of different ratios to calculate. They have their unique formulas about your company to evaluate your company. And so finance is a big part of it. Communication is also a big part of it because you communicate information. The investors are outsiders of the company. They don't know much about what's going on inside, and they really want to know. I actually spent 4 years as a VP of investor relations for a large multinational company. And I did get requests for financial information, but there wasn't very often because you can get the financial information you submit to SEC and investors can get it from them. They don't even have to get from you or you post it on your website. That flows to them. But what they really ask about is the future, the strategy, the CEO of the company, how he or she approaches whatever issues are happening. They want to try to go beyond the financials. There is a saying in the financial community that financials reflect the past of the company. And in order to be successful in investing, you need to know the future. And the future is not always is not reflected in the financial statements. And so they're looking for information that can help them understand what's going to happen with the company in the future. So finance, communication, marketing, and securities law compliance, that's also a very important component of investor relations. There are a lot of regulations. They tell you what you can say, what you cannot say, when you can say it, when you cannot say it. To establish a two-way communication between the companies, so again, another concept, two-way communication. It's not just you talking to investors, but you're also listening to investors and going back to your CEO, to your management team, and telling them what investors think about your company, what their concerns, because sometimes investors can identify something that will be very helpful for management to know. Between company, financial community, and other constituents, which ultimately contributes to company security and fair. Okay. So the idea of investor relations, and we're going a little bit from the communication school to the business school now, which is appropriate to have business students here. I guess it's more of economics rather than management. But the idea of investor relations is based on a concept called efficient market hypothesis. So, not asking professors, but students, do you guys know what is efficient market hypothesis? Have you heard it in any classes? You didn't have to take economics? Not yet? All right. But basically the idea is of efficient market hypothesis that the prices of companies, the prices of securities, the shares of the companies on the market must fully reflect all available information. So basically the prices of stock, the prices of shares should be fair. This is what fair is. Whatever the actual true value of a company is, that's how much it should be worth on the stock market. This is ideal scenario. In order to achieve this efficient market, 3 assumptions must be made, must be achieved. The first one is all relevant information about the company and its performance is publicly available. In other words, if you don't know that the company is sitting on $100 billion in cash, then you're not gonna assign $100 billion value to that company. If you know that the company owns $100 billion, then you will say, well, this company is clearly worth $100 billion. I know they have that money. And that becomes a job of investor relations officer to communicate information about the company and its performance to investors. Because again, they are outsiders of the company. Investors are not part of the company. You can go and buy shares of Walmart right now after this class. You're not going to get access to all the information that Walmart has, but you will be small owner of Walmart stock. The second assumption is all market participants have equal access to such information on a timely basis. This is also an issue in investor relations. It's less so nowadays, but before 2000, year 2000, it was a very big issue, because when I was in investor relations, for example, I would meet with big companies. I would meet with Merrill Lynch quite often, or they would call me and they would ask me questions about whatever, the new plant we were building. I worked for a large machine building company. We were the largest steel producer in Europe. We owned companies in Europe and the United States. We built drilling rigs, we built submarines, we built tankers, we built everything. We were bigger than GE. The company doesn't exist anymore, not because of people. But anyway, and so I would tell all the information I had to Merrill Lynch, because they would call me. I would have Credit Suisse, another big investor in our company. They would call me and ask me about the company, and I would tell them information. But if you're a small investor sitting somewhere in rural Iowa, you wouldn't call me. You wouldn't know what to ask even. You wouldn't know my phone number. And so the information would go to big market participants, to professional investors, but other investors won't get that information. And so Merrill Lynch then can make a lot of money by trading on information that's not available to anybody else. And so this was a big issue, that there wasn't equal access to information. And maybe small investor in Iowa would get that information, but it will be a month later, and it will be too late to trade on it. So people wouldn't get information at the same time. And so United States created regulation FD, which is called Regulation Fair Disclosure, and that prohibited selective disclosure. Regulation FD said, if you disclose information to one investor or one market participant, you need to disclose it to all of them. And so, again, this becomes a job of investor relations to disclose information and to disclose it equally to everybody. It's still not perfect, but it's better now. And then finally, the last assumptions, which almost never happens. All investors are rational and capable of evaluating the information available to them. So I give all the information, I give it to everybody equally, and then half of investors say, well, that's great news, let's buy more shares. And then another half say, no, that's horrible news, let's sell all the shares. It's like, how is it possible? I gave you exactly the same information at exactly the same time. Because from financial standpoint, they might have different models, but there are also different types of investors, there are different types of investment philosophies. Some of investors like risk because they can get bigger reward, some avoid risk and they're okay with smaller reward. So there are a lot of different approaches to investing. And even if you compare yourself and your actions, you know that some of your friends would be more comfortable with risk and some are way less comfortable with risk. So the same applies to the investment. And so investors actually acting differently, and that's good because this is what allows the trade to happen. When some want to sell, others want to buy. But for the efficient market, all investors must be rational and capable of evaluating the information available to them. And investor relations, although again this is a theoretical scenario, in reality not all investors are rational and capable of evaluating information available to them, but it also becomes a job of investor relations officer not just to disclose information, to make sure it gets to everybody at the same time, but also to educate your investors, your financial analysts, everybody, all other market participants about your company. Because many financial analysts who analyzed our company, they don't, for example, understand different ways of making steel that you can, I don't remember already all the terminology, there was an arc way of making it and there was Martin. There are different technological processes for which you can make steel, and it costs differently, but the quality of steel is also different. And so you have to explain all that. Why this steel is more expensive than this kind of steel, and why this steel this month is more expensive than the steel we made last month, because it was for different client, and they require different quality of it, and so on. So you have to educate and explain a lot of stuff about your company to people who may never heard about stuff like different types of steel production, or how semi-submersible drilling rig is different from onshore drilling rig, and so on and so forth. So investor relations people communicate information, make sure it gets to everybody, and they also educate market participants about what the company is actually doing and what it means for the share price and for the future of the company. So this is the job of investor relations officers. And so when I, in casual conversation, which sometimes happens, if I have to define investor relations without PowerPoint slides, just by conversation, I sometimes define investor relations as a function of managing expectations, because essentially you manage expectations not just of your investors or financial analysts, but you also manage expectations of the employees, of the CEO of the company, because sometimes CEO will come in and say, why our stock is going down? And there is nothing an investor relations person can do if the stock is going down. If the company is not performing, no amount of communications can change that. No amount of communication can change it. But anyway, so in my mind, the investor relations function is primarily about managing expectations. So let me ask you this, so I can take a break from talking. Investor relations officers I call IROs, investor relations officer. So how many do you think investor relations officers are in the United States? What's the total amount of investor relations people in the United States?
With that official title. With that official title.
Well, people doing this job, it doesn't have to have that official title. People doing investor relations job.
I don't think it's a big number.
Should be every company should have one.
Okay, so, well, not every single company, because not all companies need investor relations. Only companies that have stock traded publicly. So there are some private companies, Dell for example is a private company, they don't have their shares traded. You cannot go buy a share of Dell, but you can go buy a share of ExxonMobil or Walmart or Facebook or Snapchat or the Snap Corporation, I guess. So how many do you think are publicly traded companies are in the United States?
Can you tell us how many have stocks?
Oh, yeah, that's
Publicly held companies that trade stock on the stock market, I'd say 5,000 or 6,000.
You're absolutely right. So it's actually under 5,000, and so there should be about. It's actually now 4,000, but so there should be about 4,000 investor relations people. So if you look at the professional organization of investor relations, NIRI, it has 3,300 members. So the numbers kind of match up. Not all of them may be members of NIRI, the company doesn't pay for them. Some companies may not have dedicated investor relations person, they might go to an agency that manages it for them. But so if you want to give an answer, how many investor relations people are in the United States, is between 3,000 and 4,000. So to compare it with public relations, as I told you, the largest organization of public relations people is 22,000 people. Another organization, IABC, International Association of Business Communicators, it's about 12,000. And then finally, these are the financial analysts. These are the people who take the most time of investor relations people, because they always have a lot of questions, demands, requests, and everything else. So there are about 100,000 of them. So those 3,000 people have to service 100,000 of these people. And there are, again, not everybody whom you talk to are in financial analysts. So, but at least this 100,000 definitely you have to do it.
What's the salary compensation for those individuals?
Well, it's less than for financial analysts, but it's the highest paid strategic communication function in investor relations. So what do you think? Do you think the number is going up or down? Growing? It's actually going down. When I started, there were about 7,000 investor relations people, then 6,000, then 5,000 when I defended my PhD dissertation, then 4.5, then 4, 3.5, and now it's probably already less than this. Why do you think the number of investor relations people is going down?
Public transparency, maybe, the internet. People can find information for themselves that they couldn't before.
Okay, so perhaps there is less demand for this because, you know, with the internet, company can put the stuff online and you can find the information online. You don't have to mail it like in the past we would mail annual reports to everybody. All right.
Yeah.
Any other reasons?
Yeah, the internet's got so much stuff. You could be in data overload in about half an hour.
That's true. Any other reasons?
Many like new companies, like small companies, medium-sized companies, they don't actually have like their stocks to trade.
Okay, maybe.
As the job moved up the chain in the company, the CEO feels more important, to go to the big investors rather than leave it to.
Well, that's also a good point. The CEO, big investors always want to talk with CEO of the company, or at least CFO. Well, investor relations person still need to do a lot because CEOs don't necessarily like it. The investors want it, but CEOs don't necessarily like it. But what is interesting is, we talked about that only publicly traded companies need investor relations people. The number of publicly traded companies is decreasing very, very fast in the United States. When again I started, there were about 10,000 public companies in the United States. Now it's about 4,000. We lost more than half of publicly traded companies. The amount of IPOs that happens a year, IPO is initial public offering. This is when the company goes public. So Facebook was originally a private company and then Zuckerberg decided to make it public. So this is called IPO, when you offer shares of the company to everybody for sale. The number of IPO a year decreased from 360 a year to 128 last year. So the numbers are all dropping. So there are less companies existing and there are less new companies, public traded companies appearing every year. What is going on? Why there are less and less companies in the United States? And let's have students try first, and then we'll get there. Professor answer. Any guesses?
Globalization, international organizations.
What is going on?
Is your lack of
Two dirty words.
No, Max don't do that. All right. Sorry.
I was just thinking globalization, US companies, maybe there's more international business happening that could be affecting it.
Sorry.
That's
Okay, so globalization may have something to do with that, right?
There's far more startups.
Oh, let me turn off the Wi-Fi so it doesn't try to connect to it.
The size of a publicly traded company is much larger than your startups, mom and pops, and people, young people with cutting edge, small businesses. I think is.
So you think there are more small
tech,
companies
more
now
small
that
tech stuff.
they cannot perhaps take advantage of becoming a public traded company. All right. Any other guesses? Okay, your turn.
Mergers are occurring at a rapid rate. You hear about it going on all over the place. The second thing is biotech. Very, very small companies, 3, 4, maybe 10 people, develop a product. Once they initially feel they can pass testing, that costs, it could cost $100 million to go through, get the FDA approval and all this stuff. And I have a friend of mine who's the vice president of a major pharmaceutical company, and his job is to go find these little companies and provide them with funding, and then they get the product to produce in their manufacturing plants. So those little companies are inventing one drug, and it goes to a big chemical company because they want it. And then
that's a good reason also. So one of the reasons, probably the most important one, is there are actually way less small companies today than we had in the past. So in 1996, the average IPO, so the company when it hit the market, was $85 million. In 2014, the average IPO is $186 million. And only 4% of all the new IPOs are less than $75 million. 54% of them in 96 were below $75 million. So now the companies are huge. And one of the saying among financial analysts actually is, if you have a new company and you want to take it to an IPO, you are not supposed to have a good competitive position. You're supposed to dominate the market. You should be the main company. You should create your own niche and you should own it. There should be no competitors, absolutely. You should crush them. If you just want to compete, if you have good competitive position, it was good for 1990s, it's not good for now. You have to be the main company. And so to become a public company, the requirements today are completely different. Facebook, now we see that, this company dominates. But if you are something less than Facebook, investment banks are not going to be happy dealing with you. Another reason, absolutely right, mergers and acquisitions. WhatsApp, how many of you use WhatsApp? It was supposed to go for IPO, but Facebook bought it. Instagram, how many of you use Instagram? It was supposed to go for IPO, but Facebook bought it. They don't even let them go. And as your example, the company, small company develops a drug. In the past, they might have go for IPO and have their own company, but instead big pharmaceutical grabs them immediately. They don't even have a chance to get to the IPO. There are also less investors nowadays.
I have a class starting in about 6 minutes. You guys can stay. I think this is very, I want to thank you for coming up. I've enjoyed it. I hope they did. Okay,
Thank you,
thanks a lot.
Professor. Thank you so much.
I will take care of the other half.
Thank you,
Just
Professor.
bring them here.
Yeah, I could bring them here.
So there are also less investors. In the past, people would invest in stock. You would go and buy shares of Walmart, or you would buy shares of ExxonMobil.
I think this is interesting point of view from our class.
So today, people usually don't invest directly into the company. We have 401ks, 403bs, or whatever all these numbers. We invest in mutual fund, and then the mutual fund invests on our behalf. And so there are less investors on the market. They are bigger as well. These mutual funds, they invest millions, tens of millions at once, versus regular people who might have invested $1,000 or even hundreds of dollars. And so these big mutual funds, pension funds, they want big companies to invest in. They're not going to mess with small companies because they're too small for them. And so there are less investors on the market, and that's why there is less publicly traded companies as well. There is more money available elsewhere. Instead of asking investors to give you money, you can go to a bank and borrow. And with interest rates being low, many companies just go and borrow money from a bank instead of becoming a publicly traded company. There is certain fear of shareholder activism. I'm not sure if it's well, I'm sure it's a legitimate factor for some companies. Shareholder activism, do you guys know what the shareholder activism is? So when you buy a share of a company, you now have a say. You have a right to vote in the company matters. Every year there is annual shareholder meeting, and you get to vote for who is going to be CEO of the company, if they should merge with another company, or if they should acquire another company. There is even a vote that started only last year on how much CEO should be paid. So you get to say how much CEO of Walmart will get paid next year. And sometimes shareholders don't like how much money CEOs are being paid. This is a so-called advisory vote, so company doesn't have to listen to shareholders. This is the first year it was done, or last year was the first year it was done, where the shareholders now have an advisory say if they're happy with compensation to chief officers of the company. But even although it's advisory, it can create a nightmare for a company. Majority of shareholders say, no, you don't deserve $10 million. And the company says, yeah, let's just give you $10 million anyway. And so companies don't necessarily want to mess with all the shareholders and their opinions. Sometimes it's even worse. If you buy 1 share, 2 shares, 10 shares, that's one thing. But if you buy a quarter of all shares of the company, you can actually block major decisions. As a famous example in almost all the business books is the Warren Buffett, who destroyed chances of CocaCola to own Gatorade. Do you guys know Gatorade? So it was a product developed at University of Florida, where I got my PhD, so everybody are fans of Gatorade over there. And when it was
sugar water, man. It's just sugar water.
I don't know. I'm not a chemist. Yeah. But anyway, so they were ready to get off the university campus and they wanted to pair with some big company. CocaCola was the biggest at the time, and they wanted to sell their product to CocaCola so Coca-Cola would sell it. And the CEO of Coca-Cola was so happy to do it. They made an excellent deal. There are several case studies about it, saying that they were all in New York. Champagne was already on ice. They were getting ready to celebrate. I know how true it is, but that's what in the textbooks. And then Warren Buffett said, no. As a shareholder, I'm voting against this deal, and since I own the quota of Coca-Cola, my vote is decisive. You cannot do the merger, you cannot buy Gatorade without my approval. And so Gatorade, within a year, went to Pepsi, and Coca-Cola had invented their own cheap version of Gatorade, the Powerade. Or is that way around? No, Powerade is Coca-Cola.
Powerade is the less popular.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so some companies don't want to share their power with some shareholders. If I am CEO of the company, I don't want somebody who bought my shares to tell me what to do and how to live my life and run my company. And so there is also some perception that we don't want to become a publicly traded company, rather we stay as a private company. But there are ways around it. Zuckerberg, for example, when he made Facebook public, he kept voting shares for himself. So other shareholders get part of the profit, but they don't get to vote. Regulations. So there are a lot of regulations to be a publicly traded company. And people are saying that it costs us millions of dollars to be a publicly traded company. You have to create annual report. You have to have annual shareholders meeting. You have to have these votes. You need to make sure that all your shareholders can vote. You have to listen to them. And so people are saying, well, why bother with all these regulations? We can just borrow money from a bank and let's not even be a publicly traded company again, like Dell. Dell became a publicly traded company. They didn't like it, how much money it cost them, how many investors. Then they were target of hostile acquisition. Somebody wanted to buy them, and so they said, yeah, we're not going to do that again. And they went back they became private company again. And then finally, there was last summer, there was a big meeting in New York City. All the largest investors, the Blackrock, Vanguard, these are the largest mutual funds. Their CEOs met in New York, and they said that they think the biggest problem in investment market is lack of trust. They said they cannot trust the companies, they cannot trust information coming from companies. And so this, again, this is the job of investor relations people, building this trust, building this relationship. So what they did is actually, they issued a joint statement from all the largest investors where they said that they think the biggest problem in the market is lack of trust, which is perfect. For me as a person who studies investor relations and offers consulting services in investor relations, because I can say to the companies, hey, I can help you build the trust with your investors and shareholders, just pay me a lot of money. But so these are some of the reasons why the amount of publicly traded companies is declining in the United States, and as a result, the amount of investor relations people is declining in the United States. The salary is going up though, so that's good. But still, as a financial analyst, you make way more money than you do as an investor relations person.
How is that trend internationally though? If that's happening here, we usually affect what goes on, say, other markets. So are they seeing the same type of numbers and decreasing?
It's different in different countries. So the book that I was bragging about at the beginning, it has a section, international section, where I have contributors from different countries talk about. So Argentina is actually reverse. I think they are growing. Brazil, I think, is going down. So it's different in different countries.
So it's not, it's not a trend overall.
I think it's trend overall, but there are some countries that are exception because they are on different stages of their development. But I don't know for all the countries. But again, public traded company is such a US concept in European countries, although this is where it started, but it's more common to borrow money from a bank, at least in the past it was when I was practicing, than to become a publicly traded company. All right, so let's switch to something else. Let me ask you this. How old do you think investor relations is? When do you think investor relations started? what century or what year? Just everybody pick a year in your head.
60 years?
Just pick a year, so 1950. Okay.
Yeah, 1950.
All right, anybody has before that or after that?
I think there was a snake, and there was an Adam, and there was an Eve. And a tree, I think that's when it started right there.
Which one of them was a publicly traded company? The Apple? So for investor relations, we need to have the publicly traded company. And there is the very first share that was ever created actually survived, and it's located in museum in Sweden. I think it's Sweden. I communicated with them by email because I needed the picture of it. So I needed to buy copyright on this. This is how it looks. What century do you think it is?
17.
It's even before 17. This share was issued in 1288. So this is the start of investor relations. The company split their shareholding into 8 parts. So there used to be 8 of those. So 12.5% of the company is represented by each one of them. And so the first one was sold because the owner of the company needed to finance expansion. The very first company is called Stora Kopparberg. And so June 16, 1288, the first share was sold. So this is officially the start of, it wasn't really a publicly traded company because back then there were, not everybody were allowed to own the company. You need to be of a noble descent to do that. So it's not really a publicly traded company, but that's the closest earliest mention to shareholding corporation and the first share and some kind of investor communication. So the Stora Kopparberg company, this is the company that produces copper. It's a mine. They produced copper, and back then there were knights, and they all needed armor made out of copper because it's light. And so the demand for copper expanded greatly, and the owner of that mine needed to hire more people, but didn't have enough money to pay them. And obviously it would have been profitable because you get the copper, then you make armor, you sell it to the knights, knights win some kind of battle, they give you more money or whatever it is they were doing. And so he decided that he needed to get money to hire people to produce more copper. And this is the first time 12.5 stock of the company was sold. The company actually still exists today. So it's still a big corporation. I don't know if they still produce copper, but they do something. And so, again, this is the first shareholder corporation, but you cannot really call it publicly traded company because not every single person was allowed to buy that. The true first publicly traded company is Dutch East India Company in 1602. And this Dutch East India Company is famous because it was also the very first multinational company. So the very first shareholder corporation and the very first multinational corporation, the same company, Dutch East India Company. And now the stock is open to everybody. Every single person was allowed to buy, and they paid great dividends, so people were very happy buying the stock. They paid a lot of money in dividends. And because it was so popular to buy shares of Dutch East India Company, they created their own stock exchange, Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The very first stock, the only stock that was traded at Amsterdam Stock Exchange was the stock of Dutch East India Company. And then in the US, people usually talk about 19th century, and the US, it started with something called sucker list. There were a lot, and the shares were sold door to door. People would go to your door and say, do you want to invest in a gold mine in California? Give me your money, and then a year later I'll bring you a lot of gold. And so people would invest. They never see that person again. They would lose all their money. So there was a lot of negative connotations about investments in the United States. There were a lot of schemes to get people out of their money, especially the common folk somewhere in the Midwest. They would promise to gold mine or irrigation or oil fields, and people would invest and they would never see a person again. And that those schemes get so widespread that the government had to step up and enact something called blue sky laws to address those blue sky securities. So all these fake shares were called blue sky securities because there was no support to the shares other than the blue sky of Kansas. So one of the governors said that you're buying essentially a blue sky of Kansas, nothing else to support it. No gold mines, no oil fields, no anything else. And the government then issued hasn't changed. Blue sky laws to make sure that there is no speculative schemes. So when you are selling shares of a company, they actually stand for something, that there is an actual company. If you are selling shares of a gold mine, there is an actual gold mine. And this is the start of the actual investor relations in the United States, because the blue sky laws created a requirement. If you want to sell shares to somebody, you have to disclose and prove that you actually own the company, that you actually have the means of production, you can actually return the money. So all the investor relations in the United States can be traced back to something called blue sky laws, because they introduced the very first requirement. Unfortunately, blue sky laws was state level laws. So if I'm in New York City and I sell securities of a company in California to a person in Kansas, no state can do anything, because I'm not violating the law in New York. I may be violating the law in Kansas, but I'm not in Kansas and I'm never going there. So it became very popular to move from state to state as you're doing the trade, so as to avoid all these blue sky laws. And so eventually, federal regulations were created, and these are the main regulations of all investor relations up to today. They still exist, they're still in place. The 1933 Securities Act and the 1934 Securities Exchange Act. If you ever do investor relations, if you decide to work for a publicly traded company, these two laws still govern everything you do: Securities Act and Securities Exchange Act. And this is the history of investor relations is divided into pre-professional period and professional period. So with the introduction of federal regulation, this is the start of the professional period, which itself is divided into three periods: communication period, financial period, and synergy period. And we can skip that. Basically, the history of investor relations look different depending upon what kind of period you are talking about. It started as a purely communication function. Most of the investors between 45 and 75 were regular people, not professional investors, just regular people who had extra cash, and they had so much money that they could not spend it all, so they needed to invest. After World War II, there was a big boom of income in the United States. United States was rebuilt in Europe, United States was rebuilt in Asia, and so all this income that was generated in the United States had to be invested in something. And companies were happy to take money from people so that they can get even bigger, they can grow even bigger. And the whole job of public relations people was not necessarily to explain the company or educate the public, but to create a fancy show so that they can sell as many shares to the public as possible. Everything was perfect. The stock was growing. No matter what the company was doing, everything was growing. The whole United States economy was booming. You can be working at the worst company at the time, the stock would still be growing. Everything was expanding. It was a happy time for everybody. And then in 1975, the market slowed down. Europe was rebuilt, Asia was rebuilt. There was no more expansion that can support all this growth, and so the stock slowed down. That was the time of panic. I'm not making my $1,000 a day anymore. What is going on? The market became professional. Now we have professional advisors, we have financial analysts. They started telling you, don't invest in this company. invest in this company instead. Or better yet, just give me your money, I'll invest them for you. This was the start of the mutual fund. The very first index fund appeared, Vanguard index fund appeared sometime in the 70s, don't remember the exact year. So now, instead of regular people who buy 1 to 3 shares, now there are big professional investors who would collect money from all the regular people and invest on their behalf. And the market changed. Now, investor relations people became part of the finance and treasury department because they were talking with financial analysts. They were not talking with regular people anymore, with common folks anymore, with Iowa farmers or the California teachers. So instead of the corporate communications, the focus was on financial information, on financial formulas. And then at the beginning of the 21st century, they changed again. There were several events that happened in the United States. There was Regulation FD that said that as an investor relations person, you cannot focus on just professional investors. You have to focus on everybody. It should be fair disclosure to everybody. Then there was several problems with overhyping the stock. Enron was the largest of them all, the company that could not support its valuation, not even close. It was significantly overvalued, and so it collapsed very quickly and went bankrupt. And the focus is now moves from finance slightly back to communications, and today we are saying that in investor relations to be successful, you need to have a synergy between finance and communication. You need to be able to explain what is going on, you need to explain the strategy, but of course you still need to understand the basic financial statements. So these are the main laws that govern investor relations. As I said, Securities Act of 1933, Securities Exchange Act of 34, Regulation FD, which is Regulation Fair Disclosure, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and Dodd-Frank Act. So if you ever decide to be in investor relations, you have to kind of know the basics of that. And then the final thing I want to show you is a pop quiz. These are some of the terms that we use in investor relations. So let's see if you guys can, well, some of them we discussed, like Reg FD. What is Reg FD, guys? This one. We talked about it. What is this?
What you release to one, you release to all.
Yeah, so Reg FD, what does it stand for? Regulation, fair disclosure. Yes, remember what we talked about? So Reg FD is regulation, fair disclosure. Oh, any other things you recognize on this thing?
Gross domestic product, national.
Oh, hey, so what is gross domestic product? Do you remember? Can you define?
Not textbook.
Well, it doesn't matter, just call them.
Products we produce here.
So the value of all the products, goods and services produced in the country. So this is how you can measure the value of the economy. People always compare GDP of one country versus GDP of another country. What is GDP PPP? That's the same as GDP, obviously, only purchasing power parity. What that means is it really fair to compare GDP, and again, GDP is everything, not just the products, but also services. Is it really fair to compare GDP of, let's say Ukraine and GDP of the United States, if in the United States to rent an apartment on average costs you $500 a month, and in Ukraine it's $50 a month. Maybe they make less money in Ukraine, but life is way cheaper. Here you have to pay $1,000 for health insurance a month, in Ukraine it's free. Here you have to pay $5 for Big Mac, I don't know how much is Big Mac, $5. $5 for Big Mac, in Ukraine it's less than $1. So what they're saying is if you really want to compare GDP, you need to calculate purchasing power parity. Because $1,000 in US and $1,000 in Ukraine and $1,000 in Jordan and $1,000 in Russia and $1,000 in Brazil are completely different things. And so they said calculate not the currency exchange rate, but how much you can buy of the same products and services in different countries. It's different from the exchange rate. So this is GDP, and this is GDP taking into account purchasing power parity. GNP is very similar to GDP. It's a gross national product. So gross domestic product is all the product produced in the country. Gross national product is all the product produced by companies owned by this country. So if Toyota plant produces something in the United States, we will count it in the US GDP, but we will count it in Japanese GNP, because Toyota is from Japan. So there is slight difference between the two. What is market cap? Anyone know?
Like, let's say Amazon's market cap is 750, billion or something.
Somewhere there.
Yeah.
So market cap is the overall value of all the stock of a company. So one share of Amazon may be $1,000, but if you put all the shares together, then it might be $70 billion or whatever it is. So this is market cap. So basically that's the price of the company. If you want to go on the market and buy the whole company, that's how much, well, not really, but that's how much of the shares will be worth. Because if you start buying it and people find out, then it will jump up. So you will have to pay way more. What is EDGAR? This stands for Electronic Data Gathering and Retrieval Database, and this is a database maintained by the United States government, and all publicly traded companies have to submit their reports to this database. If you don't submit it in time, you're in a lot of trouble. So
does the SEC manage that?
Yep. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, manages this database. So if you ever wanna, if you're looking for a job and some company offers you an interview, go to EDGAR, and if it's a big publicly traded company, you'll be able to find all the disclosure of the company, letters from the CEO of the company explaining what the company is strong, where the company is weak, and all the other information, which can be very useful at an interview. Then you show yourself very well if you talk about it in an interview. And does anybody know 10K, 10Q, 8K? No? So these are the actual reports that companies, publicly traded companies, file with EDGAR. 10K is an annual report. So once a year, company files that report explaining everything that's happening with the company. It's hundreds of pages, very detailed, and always includes a statement from CEO, the way CEO explains his or her view on the company. 10Q is quarterly report, so they file it every 3 months. 8K is an emergency report. So these two are periodic reports. This is emergency, if something big happened. They acquired another company. Facebook bought Instagram. That would be 8K. So we're on this side. Well, P&L. Profit and loss statement, absolutely right. So companies prepare profit and loss statement. Looks like that. Well, no, that's Belgium. That's profit and loss statement. We're not going to go through that, so don't panic. All right, so private and public companies are the ones that everybody can buy a share of. So Amazon, we can all go buy a share of Amazon. Private companies, you can't, they're private. Some people decided that they're going to own the company between themselves, so it's just one person owns it. Proxy statement, does everybody know what a proxy statement is? That can be used even outside of the investment world.
I know it has something to do with shareholders, right? I just don't know how. I've
So
heard it
what-
before, but I'm not big in finance, so.
Yeah, well, but you're absolutely right that shareholders, as I told you, they get to vote about all the decisions about the company. And quite often shareholders don't care, or they don't know what to vote about Walmart or what to vote about Amazon. So they can write a proxy statement, which means you allow somebody else to vote on your behalf. So if you, companies, what they do, they send you those proxy statements. If you own the company directly, for example, I bought, just for my investor relations, I bought one share of many different companies. So they can show them in classes examples of proxy statements and everything else. So they send me, like Walmart, for example, sends me a notice of annual shareholder meeting. They're saying, well, we're going to pay that much to our CEO, we're going to vote for these people, we're going to do this. And then they say, you can come to our meeting in Arkansas somewhere, or you can sign a proxy statement and we will vote on your behalf. So essentially you are letting the company decide whatever they want to do with themselves. So it's like, okay, I don't care. It's like you're electing the presidents. If next presidential election, or let's look at the last presidential election, instead of voting for Trump and Clinton, you could have said, I give my proxy vote to US government and I let US government choose whatever they want to, whomever they want to be the next president. So this is a proxy statement. You let somebody else vote for you. Reg we already know, Sarbon 60 we already know, and on Frank we already know. These are all the key regulations of investor relations. Okay, so I think that's enough. Do you guys have any questions, comments? Do you want to know something I didn't say?
Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
All right, sure. Well, I'm from Russia, so we're actually very international class here today. And I got my, I went to the university in Russia to get degrees in geography and English, and it's a pedagogical university, so essentially by my first degree I'm a teacher of geography and teacher of English. And in Russia the education is 6 years, it's considered professional degree, so it's bachelor's plus master's. And the 6th year is always professional practice. So they sent me to teach geography in high school, and the week of teaching in high school I thought, I can do that, this is just crazy. And so I started looking for other opportunities to have a professional year, and I found something called Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, which is a very nice national park in Pennsylvania. It's actually right on the border between Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, where 3 states come together. And they needed somebody to go teach geography to kids in the national park. I thought, well, I go to US versus high school in Moscow. That's so much more fun. And so I went to the United States for a year, teaching the stuff and doing other park ranger stuff. And after I came back, I somehow learned English. And this was 1997, and this is when Russia, I'm sorry, was transitioning from Soviet economy to market economy. And so they really needed a lot of foreign money to come in, because there was absolutely no money in Russia back then. You can buy the whole plant for like $1 million. You can buy a giant plant with, hundreds and thousands of people working there. Everything was very cheap. And so they needed a lot of communications with foreign investors, and I was speaking English, and I was lucky that they found me, and I joined a company called Petroleum Investment House, but we invested in far more than petroleum, and we created that large mansion building company in Russia by bringing investments from foreign investors. And my office was actually in New York. Although I work for a Russian company, my office was in New York, because most of our investors were in the United States. And so then Putin came to power, and he said that there will be no more free market in Russia. You have to give 30% to well, it's not really mafia, to KGB or whatever it is. And so our company was delisted from the stock exchanges, because we could not honestly show that we couldn't be transparent anymore. So the company essentially was acquired by the Russian government. And so I was in New York in 2001, unemployed, and I thought, well, maybe I should go into teaching, because I'm a teacher by my first education anyway. And so I got master's, PhD, and then became a professor. So that's me.
It's an interesting background. You know what I mean? It's an interesting,
Yeah, well, my office in New York was in the former World Trade Center, and I lost my job in August. So like 1 month before this. I don't think I would have been that early at my desk, but still, that was lucky for me.
So I have a question. So you mentioned Enron earlier. So when there is a scandal that involves a company on the investment side, is the investor relations professional the first person people blame, or how does the blame game work when there isn't transparency from the company?
Well, the blame game can work either way. It's impossible to predict. But what's interesting is Sarbanes-Oxley Act actually identified 3 people who are responsible personally, that all the information is accurate, and these 3 people can go to jail and be personally responsible. Because in the past, before Sargon Sexley, it was the company responsibility. Even if you lied and whatever it is, as CEO of the company, you're not personally responsible. But, well, you could be, but most often no. Sargon Sexley actually specifically named 3 people who are responsible for providing truthful information to investors. CEO of the company, Chief Executive Officer, CFO of the company, Chief Financial Officer, and IRO, Investor Relations Officer. So these 3 are now considered disclosure agents, and if there is a lie or misleading statement, these 3 people can be personally responsible. So investor relations cannot avoid the blame by law.
Okay.
The investor relations person will be blamed as well as the other 2. But Enron, if any of you guys watch the movie, The Smartest Guy in the Room? Because that all kind of started, that whole problem with Enron was that financial analysts, sometimes again, financial analysts, they really pay attention to the details that companies try to hide, and sometimes they find information that company doesn't want them to find. And so the financial analyst asked a question during one of those 10Q discussions. So the company filed quarterly report, and the financial analyst looked at it, and then the company usually has a conference call where anybody can ask questions. And so the financial analyst asked a question, and the company didn't answer. He asked it again, and the company didn't answer. And then he asked it again, and the CEO or CFO, the CEO of the company became CFO and then became CEO again. I don't remember who he was at that particular time. He actually cursed at the financial analyst during the public conference call, and that was the beginning of the end of the Enron. Because everybody realized that there is really something there. If they got so upset because of that question about some one of the financial subsidiaries that Enron had, something is there. And so that was the beginning of Enron. So communications, again, how important it is. Just cursed, and that's it. That was the end of the Enron. I'm sure it would have been happened even without that, but it made it fast.
Thank you.
Anybody wants to work in investor relations? No?
Do you think that it will climb back up?
I don't know. Well, we had the big monopolies in this country before in the 20s, so I don't know.
Right.
There was discussions of antitrust regulation. Let's break Facebook into 3 different companies: Facebook, the Facebook Messenger, and something else in Instagram, because well, let's break Amazon. But then other people are saying you cannot compare Amazon with what it was at the beginning of the 20th century, because although Amazon is huge, it's still less than 5% of all the retail market. You still have grocery stores and Walmarts and everything else. How can you say that Amazon is a monopoly? The same as with Facebook. You still have Snapchat and Twitter and everything else. So I don't know. So far, everything is getting only bigger. It should reverse its trend at some point. I don't know when. But investor relations, I mean, we're not limited to the US market, to the US companies. There are still companies from other countries, and they all want to be traded in the United States. US is still where most of the money is. And so if you come from a different country, and you have education here, and you can speak English, you can go back to your countries, and you can be investor relations people for companies from your countries, from Brazil, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, India, whatever it is, and then help them get traded here in the United States and bring the money from the United States to your country, because who better understands the companies and the country than you, people from those countries.
I think after you told us we'll be held responsible, I don't think anyone.
Yeah, but that's US law. It's not necessarily Indian law or Russian law.
They're not really responsible anyway, let's face it.
Well, the Enron, no, I think investor relations person of Enron went to jail.
Maybe some, like one person goes to jail, they hang, so they make an example out of a few people. But there's hundreds of guilty.
Yes.
Not thousands, you know what I mean? So they get a slap, they take their money and go away. That's how it is. Same in Russia.
Well, if you're friends with Putin.
Yeah. Okay.
We can cut that from the camera, Mark.
Do you think Putin will be watching this?
I'll make sure he won't, but it's still a possibility.
Well, thank you very, very much for educating us really in an area that we don't cover in our courses. So I hope all of us learned a little bit about how really all these companies that we hear about all the time, how their financial side of the house works. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and doing the pop quiz.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening to me.
If anyone else has any questions, and especially Paul and Jessica, please feel free to come up. Thank you guys, and nice to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.